I'm Heather from booktubes, and today is the first books I read in each subgenre. I obviously don't have every single thing ever, but this is a long list of the first books. And I kind of have a theory about this, that the first time you read a trope or a subgenre and it's done decently well, that one really sticks with you because you have never encountered that device, that writing device before, so it leaves an impact on you. So these are ones that were my first as far as I know, and kind of my experience at the time and or my experience now, whether I recommend them, etc. First one is fantasy romance, and for that, the first one that I would classify as truly fantasy romance that I read was Radiance by Draven. This is an arranged marriage where you have two people who are completely different species who don't have anything in common, but who both want to make their arranged marriage work, and they really do try to be kind to each other. And so they really become friends in their marriage, and then long after that, finally kind of grow an attraction towards each other because they aren't attracted to each other at all because they're wildly different species and they're not into each other. And it's just a very low stakes fantasy. Not a lot is going to happen with the plot. It's very focused on the couple. It's kind of just watching them fall in love in a fantasy setting, and I never read a book quite like it before, and it is an all-time favorite. Then for historical romance, I read The Naked Duke by Mackenzie. This one I read because the cover did not feel like a bodice ripper to me. At the time, I was still dealing with my own preconceived notions about romance, and so I picked this one up. And I really liked it because it was insta-love and it was high heat right away. They literally meet in bed because he thinks she's a prostitute and she was asleep when he came to the room that he thought was his, that someone had let her stay in or whatever. And she's an American heiress, and he's like, okay, we've been compromised, I need to marry you. And she's like, no. And he falls first, and it's delightful. I really enjoyed it. The other people I know that have read this didn't love it as much, so this one might be specifically because of when I read it on my romance journey, but it was something I really enjoyed. Then for paranormal romance, I have Mercy Thompson by Patricia Briggs. This is not one that I recommend. I didn't really recommend it much at the beginning because there's not enough romance in it for my actual taste. And now I no longer recommend it at all because I've heard that the Indigenous Native American representation is really not the best. I honestly can't speak to that. I definitely don't remember any of the things from it, but it was shifters and kind of like mystery type things. But yeah, I read a lot of those books kind of hoping for more romance and never really got it. For contemporary romance, I know it was Playing for Keeps, which is Neighbors from Hell #1 by R.L. Matthews. This has some typos, but it was really funny and sweet. I picked it up because I got it off of a hate to love recommendation list on Goodreads, and I thought that I could not be into contemporary romance. I thought I needed fantasy, maybe paranormal, maybe historical, but I was like, I'm a fantasy girly. Contemporary romance, nothing could be more boring. And obviously I was pretty wrong on that because I love contemporary romance. But I picked this one up because I had read all the other enemies to lovers that sounded good that were available to me. And I picked this up, and it's not really enemies to lovers at all. She hates him a little bit. She has a bad impression of him, but it's really like hate to friends to lovers. And honestly, it was really cute. I hadn't really read that type of banter before because, again, I was a fantasy girly, so it was all like based in fantasy, and then this was just like him making fun of her for baseball and just all sorts of stuff. So I remember having a wonderful time and being so surprised by that. Next, for dark romance, I read Twist Me by Zaires, and I read the whole trilogy. Mistakes were made. This was too dark for me. This is non-consent. He kidnaps her and takes her to his island and imprisons her and rapes her, you know, consistently. And even in the third book, she's like, don't do this, I'll hate you forever. And he's like, I'm gonna do it. So they never got to the equal footing that I needed them to have, especially with how terrible he was. And yeah, I started in the deep end and I regret it. For new adult, Feral Crest High by Tijan. Am I the only one that just heard me say Feral Crest High instead of Fallen Crest High? This is why I can't be trusted. I'm pretty sure it's my first one. Again, it was an Enemies to Lovers Goodreads pick. And this is not really Enemies to Lovers either. They test her out a little bit and she's definitely intimidated by them, but as far as their actual relationship goes, it's pretty smooth. This is Stepbrother. It was definitely my first Stepbrother one, I think, and it is the type that I like, where their family is very dysfunctional and they don't really have a great relationship with the parents that they are living with, and those parents get married to each other when they are like 17, 18. So they didn't grow up with each other at all whatsoever. And yeah, I love this series, as you know. Then for Motorcycle Club, my first ever was Reaper's Property by Joanna Wylde, and this was a whole new world for me. I read this whole series. I loved it so much. This one, you have a guy who is dating this girl and he asks her to be his old lady, and she's like, I'm not your property. What? This is disgusting. Why would you ask me that? Do you think I'm old? Like, she just didn't understand the context at all, but she completely turns him down. And then her brother ends up owing the Motorcycle Club a ton of money because he did something stupid. And the guy that had been dating her that she broke up with, he pays the debt, but in exchange he gets her. And if she leaves him, then her brother's going to be not doing great. So she does that, and so it's a little bit captor. He obviously was like really into her, and then she turned him down, and he's not a jerk, but he's also like, yeah, you're not my old lady. Like, that's what you could have had. That's not what you have. There's definitely a few things that it took me a little while to adjust. I was just like, what have I gotten myself into? But I ultimately loved it. Then for romantic suspense, I started with Behind Closed Doors, which is McLeod's and Friends #1 by Shannon McKenna. And I remember the opening scene is him like watching her self-love on the security cameras, and she doesn't know that he has like cameras in her house because they suspect her or something like that. And again, just being like, what am I reading? Like, I never read anything like that before, and I was just unsure of whether to be appalled or into it, or like I was really just having no idea what I was doing or reading or what I was supposed to be feeling in this scene. And again, I read like the whole series. They're very long and they're very convoluting, and this is one of those ones where you get the POV of like the villain, and that stresses me out so much. I don't think that I would have loved these if I had read them later on in my romance journey, but at the time I read like a bunch in a row. For Billionaire, I read Bared to You by Sylvia Day. Again, an all-time favorite. It's not a good book or series, but it is one that I absolutely love. I'm sure that where I read it in my romance journey played a heavy part into that. Even though I've reread it several times, I'm like, this is such trash, but I love it. It's not good. It's not good. She breaks up with him at like the end of every book, and there's 6 books in the series, or 5 books, something like that. And the beginning of each book, they get back together. It is drama. There's definitely content warnings for sexual assault in the past and things like that, but it was a lot. I love it. You probably won't love it if you haven't already read it, but it's definitely an all-time favorite for me, and I think that's because of when I read it. Then Why Choose? My first was A Kiss of Shadows, which is Marriage Entry #1 by Laurel K. Hamilton. Again, I got this off of Goodreads. This is where I was getting like all my books. I wasn't part of the bookish community really. I definitely didn't know any romance readers who had similar tastes to mine, so I didn't know where to go for Rex at this point. And I got this off of Goodreads for a Fae list, and I had no idea that it was Why Choose. I didn't even know that was a thing. And also in this series, you have like the Fae princess who's like not grown up as a Fae princess, and also they don't want her, but if she gets pregnant, then she gets the throne. And so she's trying to get pregnant, and she's using sex to form all these alliances. And she already has all these Fae, and she goes for the Unseelie king, which Unseelie are the dark fae. I'm always been into Unseelie. I was like, yes, okay. Traumatized because he had tentacles coming out of his stomach. And I am not a fan of tentacles because of the suction cups and the like cold, slimy, fishy, dead feeling. But particularly the suction cups. And I was not having a good time during that sex scene. I was not prepared. I was not in on my monster romance loving journey yet. I was already having a hard time with the amount of guys we kept adding because this series is just like never ending. And then the tentacles came out and played, and they were like playing with sensitive private areas, and I was like, no. And I'm pretty sure that ruined the series for me. For Mafia, I read The Professional, which is The Game Maker #1 by Crest Cole. I had no idea that Crest Cole was like a big name in the romance community. I knew nothing. And I think I got this off a BDSM list on Goodreads, and I was really into it. I liked it. This is the daughter of a Russian mafia guy that she doesn't know that she is the daughter of him, and he sends his right-hand guy to go get her and like bring her into the life. And they end up falling in love, and he's her dom. For sports, my first one was Real by Kate Evans. I've heard that this has not good bipolar representation. I definitely remember feeling uncomfy, but I wasn't sure, and I kind of blamed that on my religious past with the whole demon possession type thing. And I was like, yeah, I know, yeah. So I don't recommend it much, or maybe, I don't know the last time I recommended it, to be honest, but it's because I haven't heard good things about the representation, and I can't remember a ton of specifics. I definitely remember some very particular scenes. Yeah, I definitely remember some things about this book, and I think it really stood out in my mind because I hadn't read anything like it, and after I finished it, I wanted more books like it, and I was searching for them. This is the first book in a duet. You need both for the happily ever after. There's a lot of things, and I was not a fan of what the main character did. Like, the way she left him at the end of the first book, I didn't like it at all. I kind of went like, no. But so yeah, wouldn't necessarily recommend, not because I didn't enjoy it, but because I believe that Own Voices reviewers have said, no, this is not good. Which honestly, it's pretty common that a more popular book with a representation in it that gets out to the masses, it's usually not the best representation, kind of regardless of what thing you're talking about. Then for Alien, I read Ice Planet Barbarians by Ruby Dixon. I read this because Kindle kept recommending it to me, and I was like, Kindle, I'm not into aliens. I like all these paranormals. I like shifters and vampires and fae. I am not into aliens. But I did eventually try it, and of course I was into it because it was not what I was anticipating for an alien romance at all. I loved their meet cute and how it was like instant sexy times, and she was like, whoa, slow down there, buddy. I was a huge fan of all of that. So I read a bunch of alien books after reading this, and that led me to my first ever omegaverse, which is Alpha Breeds, which is Alpha Horde #1 by Milana Jax. I had no idea what omegaverse was. I did not know that this book was omegaverse. I picked it up because it was an alien romance that I saw recommended. There weren't as many back then, I don't think, as there are now, but it was definitely a thing. I picked it up and I loved it, and I read the whole series and the spin-off series. So yeah, nodding and slick and Ness. It was all new to me, but it got me. Then my first ever queer romance was Captive Prince by C.S. Packet. I've heard, again, that this has really bad representation. It's a fantasy romance, but one of them is like the sex slave of the other, like actual sex slave, because their kingdom got overthrown, and it's by a woman, and I could not tell you what all the issues are. Absolutely no idea. In fact, when I read it because I did not realize it was an MM romance, and at that point in my life I would not have picked one up knowing that. So that tells you kind of, you know, where I was still. I was still kind of in the midst of early, I would say, deconstructing from growing up evangelical fundamentalist. And yeah, I was really into it. I was stressed out, but it was the type of dark romance that I would like. But there was also, I remember just feeling uncomfortable about a lot of things and like unsure, and I'm sure I would probably take issue with several things if I read it again, which I don't, and I don't recommend it. And lastly, for today anyways, my first ever Black love book was Set, which is Them Boys #1 by Alexandria House. I picked it up because it was a short novella that had been recommended by Lacey at Lacey Book Lovers. This was June 2020 that I read my first Black love book, and I quickly read several after that. But this was definitely my first one, and when I picked it up I realized that I had DNF'd it previously because I thought that it was going to be really angsty, but it was not. They got together like the very next page. This is older main characters, and it's one I've reread and love, and I love Alexandria House as an author. She writes steamy, good communication, caring, worshiping heroes. I'm just a big fan, to be honest. So those are the books that I know of in those specific subgenres that were the kind of entry point for me. Love to hear a book that introduced you to a subgenre or a trope and you know that it's your favorite because it was your first. And also if there's other subgenres or maybe even tropes that you would like me to do this video for, let me know. Thanks so much for watching. Bye!